Welcome to NarrativeNook audio tales where enchanted stories come to life. If you enjoy our stories, please subscribe, like and share to support our channel. Enjoy listening.
Jonathan brought the children to the restaurant and ordered a bunch of food for them. However, they didn't appear to have any appetite. I thought you all were hungry." Their reaction confounded Jonathan. In response, Estella slowly took a bite of a dessert. "I'm not hungry. I just don't want to stay with that bad lady. Why is she still hanging around the hospital after Daddy asked her to leave?" Archie and Benny were also pretty distracted. They only left with Jonathan because they wanted to give their parents some private time. Nonetheless, ever since they left the hospital, they started to regret their decision because they recalled their parents always argued whenever they spent time together. They were afraid the same scenario would occur again. "You three aren't actually hungry, am I right?" Jonathan grinned when he saw through them. In response, the children lowered their heads guiltily with tightened fists. A tinge of confusion flashed past his eyes when he saw the children acting in the exact same way. Is it just me, or do they look like they were made from the same mold when viewed from this angle? Even their reaction when feeling guilty is identical. I know Roxanne gave birth to all three of them, but I feel like I can see Lucian's childhood self in the boys. In that case, it may be a good thing if Lucian gets back together with Roxanne. The look in his eyes turned softer as he asked, "Tell me the truth. You three want Mr. Farwell to stay with your mommy, right?" The children lowered their heads, staying quiet. In the end, Archie carefully met Jonathan's eyes and said, "Yes, we do. Mr. Farwell treats us well." Jonathan couldn't help but tease the boys. You know, I can treat you all well, too. See, I even brought you guys out here to eat." The children were dumbstruck upon hearing that. Amused, he patted their heads. "I'm kidding. I'm Mr. Farwell's best friend. Don't worry, I won't snatch your mommy away from him." The children sighed in relief. "You know, I've got the same sentiment as you three. Let's do our best together, okay?" His revelation delighted the children. Benny was the most excited as he celebrated in a small voice, "Yeah." Archie and Estella nodded. Grinning, Jonathan said, If you three are worried about them, finish the food quickly, and I'll send you all back." In response, the children beamed, put their thoughts away, and enjoyed the food. Meanwhile, Jack's car stopped in front of the hospital entrance before he exited the vehicle. After double-checking the hospital's name with the message he had received not long ago, he stepped into the building. Roxanne was a very important partner of his, yet he allowed her to be harmed under his care again. It was only natural he would be worried about her. That was especially the case as he was aware of how serious the symptoms of that gas poisoning could be. Ever since Lucian took her away, he had been trying to find out where Lucian brought her to. However, the search was difficult because Lucian was intentionally eluding Jack. Jack couldn't find anything, even after looking into Lucian's whereabouts for a day. He couldn't reach Roxanne's phone either. Just as he was getting extremely concerned, he suddenly received an anonymous text telling him where she was. Despite not knowing who the sender was or if the information was true, Jack still drove to the hospital in the middle of the night for an hour. He was that determined to learn her fate. Soon, the elevator arrived at the top floor of the hospital. Upon stepping out of the elevator, he saw Caden, who was guarding the entrance of a ward. With a cold expression, he questioned, "Where's Lucian?" Caden was stunned for a moment before he greeted Jack politely. "Mr. Farwell is currently inside keeping Ms. Jarvis company, Mr. Damaris. She should be sleeping by now. I can help relay your message to her when she wakes up if you have anything you want to tell her. Just please don't disturb her rest." As he spoke, he blocked Jack's path to the ward. Jack scowled and stepped toward Caden. Let me through." Grimacing, Caden pleaded, "Please don't put me in a difficult spot, Mr. Damaris. This is Mr. Farwell's order." "Then ask him to come out for a talk," barked Jack. Caden remained still with a resigned countenance. In response, Jack tried to walk around Caden, but the latter moved accordingly to deny the former entry. In the end, their interactions turned into a physical altercation. It was agonizing for Caden because he was getting roughed up by Jack. Lucian told Caden that no one was allowed entry without his permission. However, Jack wasn't an ordinary Joe. Thus, even though Caden was mandated to block Jack's path, he couldn't fight back. In the end, Caden was the only one suffering. Eventually, Jack pinned Caden to the door and was about to open it. In the next moment, the door was opened from the inside. What's going on? Lucian stepped out of the room with a grim expression, which morphed into a scowl when he saw Jack. Why are you here so late at night, Mr. Damaris? Then he closed the door and blocked the entrance with his body. In response, Jack let go of Caden and stared intently at Lucian. Where's Miss Jarvis? How is she doing? Coldly, Lucian answered, she's doing fine. You don't need to worry about her. Let me in. I want to see for myself. Jack exclaimed resolutely. Then he tried to barge into the ward again. He took only one step forward before Caden obstructed his entry once more. With Lucian around this time, Caden wasn't going to hold back anymore. As Jack stared at the two, he contemplated his actions before recognizing he wasn't going to win against them. Thus, he stopped. In response, Caden let down his guard. I wonder what Miss Jarvis would think if she learns you're preventing me from visiting her, Mr. Farwell. That was Jack's attempt at a negotiation. However, Lucian was unmoving. She won't know. Jack's expression shifted slightly when he heard that. I can tell he means it. Even if she knows, nothing's going to happen. Lucian mocked. Don't forget, Mr. Damaris, you two are only business partners. Your late-night visit is clearly overstepping her boundaries. Roxanne was someone who knew how and when to keep a distance from others. Even if she were to find out what happened that night, she would only assume that Lucian was being helpful by stopping Jack. Lucian was certain about that. Jack paled. I just want to take a look at her. Also, there's something I want to ask her about, Jack said, wanting to find out more about the situation this time. However, seemingly having read his mind, Lucian uttered, the three of us are the only ones here. There's no need for you to put up a show, Mr. Damaris. Jack frowned in confusion. What are you talking about? I've already gotten my men to look into it. There were only 3 people who were involved in this experiment at the Research Institute. Lucian's tone was cold as he spoke. The other person has been working with Roxanne for many years. I doubt he has the need to do something stupid like this. Therefore, you're the only suspect left. Jack was taken aback. He never thought that someone would assume that he was the one who did something to the experiment despite how he was wrecked with worry about Roxanne for the entire day. Mr. Farwell, please remember that this is a project spearheaded by the Damaris family. Why would I do something like this? Jack questioned, finding Lucian's doubts hilarious. Lucian furrowed his brows. That was a question he had mulled over before. Indeed, Jack did not seem like he had the motive to do this. However, he still came to that conclusion in the end. There were only 3 people in the experiment, and Jack was the only possible mastermind behind the incident. When Jack realized that Lucian was still suspicious of him, he icily said, where is your evidence if you think that I'm the one behind this? People will laugh at you if they hear that you've been jumping to conclusions. I will find the evidence, Lucian promised, the temperature around him dropping. Jack had to take in several deep breaths before he could calm himself down again. Well, before you get it, please move aside, Mr. Farwell. I have the right to visit my business partner. Lucian remained rooted to his spot, regardless. Same goes for you. Before you can prove that you're innocent, I won't let you see her. Jack went cold with fury. He was done with Lucian's constant suspicion, and at that very moment, he felt like lunging toward Lucian to start a fight with him. Like Jack, Lucian scowled. Within seconds, Both men were as tense as beasts about to engage in a battle. Caden, who was standing at the side, was equally uneasy, ready to stop Jack at any time. The three of them were preoccupied with the tension in the air, so none noticed the elevator doors sliding open. Soon, Jonathan came out with the three children. Lucian. Right as Jonathan was about to tell Lucian he was done with his task, he was struck with confoundment when he was greeted by the sight of the sparks flying. Even the children were taken aback, but they were quick to come back to their senses. Estella then ran over to her father and spread her arms, seemingly about to protect Lucian. "You don't bully Daddy." The moment those words were out of her mouth, both Caden and Jonathan shared a look of surprise. "I didn't hear that wrongly, did I? Bully Lucian? Who's even capable of doing that?" Even Jack was baffled by the situation. "Mr. Damaris, are you here to visit Mommy?" Came Archie's soft voice from behind the man. Upon hearing the boy, Jack tucked away his wrath and turned to look at Archie. It's late. I'm sure Mommy's resting now. Mr. Damaris, if you're worried about her, why don't you come again tomorrow?" Although Archie's words sounded polite, it was still a way of asking Jack to leave. Jonathan chimed in, "Mr. Damaris, I understand that you're worried about Ms. Jarvis, but it's really late right now. Why don't you come again another day?" Jack frowned, finding something amiss about their responses. I'm on my way back too. If you don't mind, why don't we head downstairs together?" With that, Jonathan rested his arm around Jack's shoulders and quietly led the other man into the elevator. "My grandpa was talking about how he wants to visit your grandpa, so why don't we discuss when a meeting between them would be good?" The children were around, and even though Jack was upset about the situation, he could not show his displeasure right there and then. Hence, he quietly followed Jonathan into the elevator. Jonathan then gave Lucian a look before pressing the button to close the elevator doors. Only when the elevator started going down did Jack realize what seemed amiss. All of them were telling him that it was too late for him to visit Roxanne, but Lucian was still in her ward. What right does he have to stay there? "Mr. Damaris, it's best not to get in the way of two people's relationship. Don't you think so?" Jonathan gave Jack a long look. "You're the Damaris family's heir. What kind of woman can you not get? Must you snatch that one woman from Lucian?" Jack snapped back to his senses and gave Jonathan an apathetic look. What do you know?" Jonathan raised his brows. If this isn't what I think it is, then that will be for the best." After saying that, silence took over the conversation. Even after reaching the first floor, the two men shared no words as they went into their own cars and left. In the meantime, outside Roxanne's ward, the three children let down their guards once Jack was gone. Mr. Farwell, can we visit Mommy?" Archie's worry for Roxanne was written all over his face. It was the first time the children had seen their mother so sick. Although they already saw that Roxanne was awake, they still felt anxious. Lucian's expression softened when he looked at the children. Go on in. Your mommy is resting, so be quieter and don't wake her, okay?" The children nodded obediently. After getting into a line, they tiptoed into the room. Roxanne was in a deep slumber in the ward, looking as if she was in a coma again. At the sight of that, the children panicked. "Don't worry. She's just asleep. She'll wake up tomorrow morning." Lucian consoled them before they could say a word, knowing what the children were thinking about. At that, the children stared at him for a while before finally believing his words. "A good night, Mommy." Right then, Benny tiptoed over to Roxanne and gave her a peck on the cheek. Roxanne always gave them goodnight kisses when they were sleeping, so this time, it was their turn to do that. Archie followed suit and whispered, Mommy, you have to wake up tomorrow morning, okay?" Estella was last in the line, and she wanted to do the same as Archie and Benny, but her courage fled her when she finally walked over to Roxanne. Thus, she turned around to cast a hesitant look at the boys, who then gave her a look of encouragement. In the end, Estella mustered the courage to gently kiss Roxanne's cheek. "Ms. J, Oh, the girl started, but she stopped herself. A few seconds later, in a much quieter voice, she said, "Good night, Mommy." With that, Estella turned to look at her father, wanting to know his reaction. It was Lucian's second time hearing Estella addressing Roxanne in that way in the period of merely one night. When Lucian saw the girl's timid look, he frowned but could not bring himself to say anything to her. Once Estella realized her father was not asking her to change the way she called Roxanne, her eyes lit up, and she turned to look at Archie and Benny with delight on her face. If Roxanne had not been asleep, the children would have cheered out loud. Confusion danced across Lucian's eyes at the sight of their happiness, but he did not ask them any questions. The only thing he said was, "It's getting late, so hurry back to sleep." After making sure that Roxanne was fine and receiving the unexpected surprise, the children quickly agreed to that and followed Lucian out of the ward. After sending the children back to the ward next door, Lucian found his heart skipping a beat as he looked at the way they were staring at him. "I think I know why they're happy now. Daddy." Estella was the closest to Lucian, and she reached out to grab the hem of his shirt. Lucian halted in his tracks and crouched down to look at her at eye level. Tilting her head, Estella then hesitantly asked, Daddy, are you on good terms with Miss Jarvis again?" She hastily added, "You didn't say anything when I called Miss Jarvis Mommy." To her, it was a silent agreement from her father to call Roxanne that from then on. Meanwhile, both Archie and Benny were also looking at Lucian with hope in their eyes. Lucian lifted his hand to ruffle the girl's hair. This isn't something I can decide on my own. We have to wait until Miss Jarvis has recovered before asking her about her opinion." The children's eyes dimmed when they heard the ambiguous answer. The sight of the children's disappointment brought a frown to Lucian's face. He then swore to them, "But before Miss Jarvis fully recovers, I'll be taking care of her. So, don't worry and take good care of yourselves instead." In other words, he was promising the children that he would try his best to patch things up with Roxanne and return to how they were before. Even though that was not an answer the children truly wanted, it was better than nothing. Hence, they nodded fervently. "I got it." Lucian ruffled their hair before saying, "Get some rest. I'm going to go take care of Miss Jarvis now." Once he saw them bobbing their heads, he stood up and left the room. The children watched the door close with similar looks of anticipation. Should we have to convince Mommy to forgive Mr. Farwell as soon as possible during this time? Benny announced in determination as he clenched his fist. Archie nodded in agreement. After the incident, the children were getting more and more sure that Lucian liked Roxanne. However, it seemed like Roxanne had yet to figure it out, so they had to do even better to make their mother see what her heart truly wanted. Then, Archie and Benny turned to Estella, waiting for her response to the plan. Estella's eyes were bright, and she bobbed her head vigorously. "I'll keep an eye on Daddy and make sure he doesn't make Miss Jarvis angry." The three of them then smiled at each other. As it was indeed getting late, the children climbed onto their beds to sleep. Right as Archie and Benny fell asleep, the sounds of Estella crying traveled into their ears. Mommy." The boys quickly clambered upright and rushed to Estella's bedside. What's wrong, Essie?" As their voices woke Estella, they soon noticed the tear streaks on her cheeks. When Estella opened her eyes and saw Archie and Benny, a blush crept onto her face. Archie held Estella's hand in consolation as he articulated his question. Did you dream about Mommy? What did you dream about?" The girl lowered her gaze. I dreamed about Miss Jarvis." A confused look appeared on the boys' faces when they heard that. But you were calling out for your mommy." Estella timidly looked at them in silence. She did not know why, but ever since she came to know Roxanne, the mother in her dreams started looking like Roxanne. Moreover, the dreams about her mother became sweet dreams. The only exception was when Roxanne was sick. This time, she dreamed about the unconscious Roxanne again. In her dream, no matter what she said, Roxanne's eyes remained closed. That terrified her. As for Archie and Benny, although they did not hear any reply from Estella, They could guess what was on her mind by studying her expression. Essie, you see our mommy as your mommy, too, is that right? Benny asked. Estella nodded in hesitance. She then carefully asked, Archie, Benny, you won't be mad, right? Both boys exchanged a bewildered look with each other. Why would we be mad? Because I'll be stealing your mommy from you, Estella muttered, choking out the last few words as if she was about to burst into tears. Archie and Benny were flabbergasted. They never knew that was what Estella thought. Squeezing Estella's hand, Archie said, we're not mad at all. If we do get mad, wouldn't you be mad too for trying to steal your daddy from you? Estella pursed her lips and anxiously shook her head. She desperately wanted to become a family with Archie and Benny, so how could she be angry with them? Archie then took a piece of tissue and wiped Estella's tears away. If you're not mad, then we're not mad too. Benny then said, how about this? We'll call them Daddy and Mommy when we're alone. We won't call them Mr. Farwell or Miss Jarvis anymore. They're our Daddy and Mommy. Archie and Estella immediately nodded in agreement to that. Even though there were still tears on her face, Estella had a wide smile. She looked funny, and the boys could not help but laugh heartily at her. Lucian naturally had no idea what was happening in the ward next door, let alone about how the three children had sneakily promised to be a family. Thirsty. Roxanne had been unconscious for a whole day. Even though she had been injected with sedatives, she could not sleep for long. Furthermore, the children had been talking earlier, so Roxanne slowly returned to the waking world. Lucian had a tiring day, and he was about to nod off. But the second he heard her voice, he woke with a start and filled a glass of water for her. Just as Roxanne was about to sit upright to get the glass, Lucian brought the glass to her lips and shifted her to be in his arms. Roxanne was groggy from her sleep, and she instinctively felt safe in his arms. Hence, she drank the water with his help before reaching up to push the glass away. Lucian placed the glass at the side before helping Roxanne lie down on the bed again. Shortly after, Roxanne was asleep again. Fearing that she would wake once more, Lucian reached out to grab her exposed hand after a moment of hesitance before closing his eyes to nap. The following morning, Roxanne had already woken up by the time Lucian did. Her brows remained furrowed while she removed the needles for herself. Lucian glanced at his empty palm, then shifted his gaze to look at the woman before him. In a hoarse voice, he asked, when did you wake up? Why didn't you wake me up? Roxanne was too focused on the task and only realized the man was awake after hearing his voice. She hesitated for a moment, then continued with what she had been doing. You look like you were sound asleep. Besides, I am feeling better now, so I didn't wake you up. She did not spare the man a glance as she spoke. It was worth noting that Roxanne felt as if it was like a dream when she woke up to the sight of Lucian taking a short rest while holding her hand tightly earlier. But soon after, the memories of what happened last night while she was half asleep came to her mind. She knew very well it was not a dream. Lucian had indeed taken care of her for the whole night. For a bit, Roxanne had no idea how to describe her feelings after coming to that realization. Then again, at the sight of Lucian's tightly furrowed eyebrows and the visible signs of exhaustion on his face, she could not bear to wake him up and thus carefully pulled her hand out without him knowing. Evidently, the man was so tired that he was unaware of the slight movements and remained asleep. Since he was still asleep, Roxanne decided to take the chance to examine her condition before performing a simple acupuncture on herself. Little did she expect Lucian to wake up when she was at the last step of removing the needles. It was just that she became a little flustered after hearing the man's voice. What are you doing? Rubbing his temples, Lucian languidly straightened his body. A slight frown marred his countenance at the sight of her actions. Roxanne put on a calm pretense as she stared at the silver needle on the acupuncture point and pulled it out. I gave myself a body check and felt that acupuncture could help detoxify my system. Hearing that, Lucian looked at her with a solemn expression. You're doing it yourself? His tone was overflowing with concern, and that undoubtedly startled Roxanne slightly. Despite so, she still flashed him a smile as she turned around. These acupuncture points aren't too complex. I can do it myself. There's no need to worry, Mr. Farwell." Her words caused Lucian's already dark expression to turn even darker. "Mr. Farwell again? I took care of her the entire night. How can she still sound so distant?" A wave of rage surged within him. However, at the thought of how Roxanne was still unwell, he had no choice but to suppress his anger and frustration. In an instant, the whole ward plunged into a deathly silence. Roxanne could sense Lucian's sudden fluctuating mood. She was puzzled, yet for some reason, she dared not question him and only lowered her head to put away her silver needles. It was only after some time that Lucian's deep voice sounded again. How do you feel now?" He thought Roxanne had performed acupuncture on herself because she was not feeling well. Not knowing what the man was thinking, she replied flatly, "I'm feeling much better. The poison should have been completely purged now." As soon as she finished her sentence, the look in her eyes, which she fixed on Lucian, abruptly wavered as though she thought of something. Lucian knitted his brows as he noticed the change in her expression. What's wrong?" Roxanne lowered her gaze guiltily but tried to sound calm with her words. Nothing. I'm just a little worried about the kids. How are they doing?" She remembered that Lucian had brought the 3 kids over the day before. Since the kids saw how sick I was, they must be terribly worried now. Roxanne vaguely recalled that she seemed to have heard the kids' voices before falling asleep last night. Not only that, she thought she heard a soft voice that resembled that of her dead daughter. In a deep voice, Lucian uttered, "They're in the room next to this. Since you've woken up, I'll let them have a look at you before asking Caden to send them back." Roxanne agreed to it without hesitation since she did not want the kids to stay in the hospital for too long. However, Lucian made no moves even after a long while. Roxanne felt her heart lurch as the scenes of how Lucian showered her with care and concern last night filled her mind. She initially thought Lucian would head next door to bring the kids over, and she could use the time alone to cool herself down. Seeing how he remained seated in the room, Roxanne had no idea how to respond. Put the needles away," Lucian said suddenly, with his eyes fixed on the silver needles on the side of her bed that she had yet kept. Those words left Roxanne frozen in shock. Then, Lucian's gaze landed on her face, and in an unhurried tone, he added, "Those needles will scare the kids." Roxanne immediately explained with her instincts, "They won't. Archie and Benny are used to it." Sometimes, the 2 boys would even help with the disinfection and cleaning. To them, the needles used for acupuncture were actually no different from the forks used for dining. Lucian's gaze darkened. But Essie will be scared. They already got freaked out by the way you looked yesterday." Roxanne was promptly taken aback. She almost forgot that Estella was around too. Noticing how Lucian's face clouded over, Roxanne cast her eyes downward apologetically. "I'm sorry. I forgot about that." Lucian frowned. "I don't mean it that way. You don't have to apologize to me." In truth, he merely wanted to remind Roxanne that the kids were terrified by what happened the day before, and the sight of those needles might spook them out again. It was clear that Roxanne had misunderstood what he said. At that point, Lucian felt his temples throbbing badly. He had always been a pragmatic man who was not good with words. Faced with this situation, he did not know how to explain himself. After rolling up the felt needle case and carefully putting it in the drawer beside the bed, Roxanne turned around to look at Lucian. All right, I've put them away. You can ask them to come over now." The man stared morosely at her. Ultimately, he gave up on explaining himself and headed next door without saying anything. As the door shut close, Roxanne heaved a sigh of relief and immediately seized the opportunity to sort out her mind. As much as she was unwilling to admit it, she was actually instinctively reliant on Lucian when she was in extreme agony last night. Had Lucian not held her hand tightly throughout, she reckoned she would not be able to have a good night's sleep. On that, She was sure Lucian would have figured out her feelings. Yet, he still chose to stay by her side to give her support and reliance. Roxanne's resolve began to waver. While she performed acupuncture on herself earlier, she was contemplating if she wanted to clarify things. Nonetheless, when Lucian finally woke up, she backed out and did not even dare to spare him a glance. She had reacted that way because she feared she had read too much into things. Of course, after what happened last night, she knew she should not avoid Lucian and Estella again like in the past, even if she did so out of gratitude for the man's kindness. Roxanne's mind was in a tangled mess at the mere thought of the situations she might have to face from now on. Suddenly, a knock on the door was heard. Before Roxanne snapped back to her senses, the three kids rushed in from outside. They ran up to the side of her bed and stared at her with their bright eyes. Following behind the kids, Lucian strolled in and said, They couldn't stop worrying about you and woke up long a time ago." Roxanne patted Archie's and Benny's heads soothingly. Mommy, how are you feeling? Do you feel any discomfort?" Archie and Benny stared at her with concern. Roxanne could see her pale expression reflected in her children's eyes, so it was completely understandable that they were really worried. Roxanne stated apologetically, "I'm all right now. I must have scared you guys yesterday. I'm sorry for that." Benny reminded her in his childish voice, "You have already apologized to us yesterday. Also, we don't need you to apologize because we only want you to be healthy and well." Roxanne felt touched by their words, and a smile spread across her face. Essie is also worried about Mommy. She was so scared she burst into tears when she dreamt that you fell unconscious. When Benny noticed Estella hiding behind the other children, he took a step back so Roxanne could see her. Estella's head was lowered as she sneaked a peek at Roxanne. She remembered Roxanne flatly refusing to let her call the latter Mommy the last time she asked her. However, she had repeatedly called Roxanne Mommy when the latter was unconscious the night before. She was afraid Roxanne would remember and be upset with her. Roxanne noticed the disconcerted look on Estella's face. It made her heart ache, so she pulled Estella into her embrace. Mom. Perhaps it was because Estella's mind was full of thoughts of the events on the previous night that she almost called Roxanne Mommy, but she quickly realized that she had said the wrong thing and hastily uttered, Miss Jarvis. Roxanne suddenly felt nervous when she heard Estella's first word and only breathed a sigh of relief after the latter changed her words. She smiled and stroked Estella's head. I'm sorry. I said I'd go to the kindergarten to see you, but I haven't yet. Did you wait a long time for me? Estella pursed her lips and was about to nod when she noticed Roxanne's pale expression. She shook her head instead. It's the same thing if I come to see you. With that, she lowered her gaze sadly. It would be better if you weren't sick. Roxanne's heart melted upon hearing Estella's words. It's my fault. I was too careless and made you guys worry. Estella shook her head again. Roxanne chatted with the children for a while when all of a sudden, Archie walked over to Lucian. Benny's and Estella's gazes immediately followed him. His action confused Roxanne. Thank you, Mr. Farwell. It was because you took care of Mommy yesterday that she was able to recover so quickly. Archie thanked Lucian sincerely. Benny, too, quickly followed suit. In the end, Archie and Benny even bowed politely to Lucian. Lucian stared at the two children before his gaze fell on Roxanne. He said meaningfully, Don't mention it. I promise I'll take good care of your mother." Upon hearing that, Roxanne instinctively looked at him. Lucian's tone made it seem like a promise. One would have thought they were a couple if one didn't know them. In reality, Lucian only took care of her when she was sick. Why does he have to make his words sound so ambiguous? Roxanne felt nervous and emotional at the same time. When did Lucian tell the children about this? What else did they talk about when I was unconscious? As Roxanne was deep in thought thinking about what Lucian had told the children, the three children came over to bid her farewell. Mommy, since you're fine, we will be heading home first. Rest well. We will be waiting at home for you." Benny smiled heartily. His smile only served to make Roxanne puzzled. When she was sick previously, the children would want to stay by her side the whole time. Why would they proactively bid me farewell without arguing to stay with me? Benny inquired endearingly. "Mommy, you're going to let Essie tag along with us, right? She will be terrified if she's alone." Roxanne returned to her senses and glanced at Lucien instinctively. She nodded hesitantly. Take good care of her." The children had a scare the night before. Estella did not have a strong sense of security, so it would be better if Archie and Benny accompanied her. The boys nodded fervently. Then, we shall head back first." The kids then ran out of the ward, waving goodbye to Roxanne. They were all smiling gleefully when they turned around knowing that their plan worked. "Daddy told us yesterday that we must give him and Mommy some private space." Although they were worried about Roxanne, they were confident that Lucien would be able to take great care of her. Roxanne's brows furrowed as she stared at the children's retreating figures. She had a sudden urge to call them back as she did not know how to face Lucien alone. However, before she could say anything, Lucien's voice rang out. "I'll let Caden send them back. He will stay there and take care of them." Since he had spelled things out so clearly, Roxanne could no longer refuse. She could only nod in agreement. "I'll see them off." Lucien shot her an unfathomable look before he turned and walked out of the ward. Roxanne was finally left alone in the ward. She knew Lucien had left because he saw her predicament and wanted to give her time to prepare mentally. This showed how much he cared about her. Roxanne turned her head to look out the window as she tried to calm herself. She had no idea what Lucien was thinking. However, from what happened the previous day, she knew that Lucien treated her well, not just because of his and Jack's business rivalry. Perhaps, there was some sincerity in his actions. Anyone would be moved by someone taking care of them the whole night. Roxanne was not an exception. However, there were still many things Lucien did not explain to her yet. Rather than overthinking her relationship with Lucien, Roxanne decided to go with the flow. With that, Roxanne finally composed herself. Perhaps Lucien and Roxanne were connected telepathically to some extent, as she heard noises coming from the door just as she figured out how to face Lucien. Seconds later, Lucien walked in from the door. Have they left? Roxanne was stunned for a moment before a smile spread across her face. Lucien's gaze darkened upon seeing her expression. He stared at her and nodded. "Caden will take good care of them. You don't need to worry." Roxanne grinned. I know. Thank you. Not only did you have to take care of me last night, but you also had to take care of them too." Her tone was natural, with no trace of her previous detachment and stiffness. Emotions swirled in Lucien's eyes as he noticed the change in her, but he suppressed them.
Thank you for listening. If you have enjoyed this story, please like and share so others can see it too. Also hit the subscription button and notification bell so you can be notified on our next release. Thank you for your support. God bless you.